Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Okay. All this technical stuff mystifies me, so I'm so grateful that there are people who can manage that. Well, I'm so happy to be back with you. I'm sitting here thinking what a beautiful day it is in San Francisco, and yet, of course, we hold in our hearts the trauma, which is always part of human life, but seems especially acute right now. So I feel like coming together in person like this, and thank you to those of you who are joining us online, is a way for us to kind of soothe our broken hearts about the world. I'm going to share with you a fairy tale today. This talk today is based on a chapter from my book, The Zen Way of Recovery. And I started this chapter with a quote from the travel writer Pico Iyer, who said, "We run and run from who we are, only to discover, of course, that that is precisely what we can never put behind us." And I feel like in our sitting practice, we have a chance to get to know ourselves very intimately. And when we practice with others in Sangha like this, Suzuki Roshi said that practicing together is like milk and water mixing. But he also said it's like a bunch of rocks in a jar with the rough edges getting worn down over time. So maybe both of those things are true. So I come from the Soto Zen tradition. We call our meditation Zazen. And when we sit Zazen, we sit still in the midst of a crazy world, not leaning to the left nor the right, neither forward nor backward. And we return again and again to the breath. And I feel like when we sit, we're voluntarily imposing a limitation on ourselves. You know, for a while, we're not going to do what we usually do. We're just going to sit in the middle of our life, keeping our spine straight, sitting in a particular way, choosing for a time to do this rather than something else. And I think that within this limitation, we can find a tremendous freedom. Now, of course, our mind wanders when we sit. That's what the mind does. And I feel that meditation is that moment when we come back to the breath. We come back to ourselves. We come back to our true nature over and over again. I have to tell you, though, I did practice at Tassajara for 3 years and then went back for 10 years every summer to cook for the guests. And during that 3 years, those were practice periods where we were closed to the public. And we would have many, many 7-day sittings where we would sit from 4:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, you know, with breaks in between. And I have to tell you that during one of those 7-day sessions, I did write a musical comedy. And it was a satire based on Zen practice, which I call, you know, I said we sit Zazen, I called it the Wizard of Zaz. Now, of course, because I wrote it, I got to play Dorothy. So I wasn't coming back to my breath too much during that time. The last time I was here, I spoke about my own recovery from alcoholism. And for me, alcohol is a kind of metaphor for something we all struggle with, which is our very human craving for things to be different than the way that they are. And the Buddha taught that our self-created suffering is caused by craving or desire. And the word for that in Sanskrit is tanha, which is translated as thirst. So for those of us who are in recovery from substances, that's a very literal kind of thing for us. But when I talk about alcohol, it's kind of a metaphor. And by the way, I think we're all in recovery from something, some dark thing that rolled into our life. Whether or not we're literally in recovery, we need to confront our self-defeating and self-destructive habits of mind or body. Practice offers something precious to all of us, which is the freedom of restraint, the freedom to pause before we act or speak. And we can ask ourselves, is this going to be a benefit to myself and others? Or will this be a destructive word or action? So as I speak today, please let the word addiction be a metaphor for the suffering caused by this very human craving. None of us are immune to that craving. For me, when I finally made the decision not to drink or use drugs, my true freedom as a human being began. I learned to pause and reflect, and before mindlessly repeating the patterns of habitual self-destructive behavior that I'd engaged in since I'd been a teenager. Why did I do that? Because I did not want to be in this mind and body. And I wanted to escape myself. But as Pico Iyer points out, that's quite impossible. So in practice, we vow to practice and recovery too, this pause, this turn again and again, no matter what we are confronted with. And this is what I call the alchemy of recovery. Buddhist practice is also kind of a alchemy, our practice of sitting quietly alone or with other people, coming back to the breath and watching what arises within us. Sometimes those things are troubling or things we've tried to push aside. But by opening our heart to those dark places in ourselves, I think we're more able to extend ourselves to other people. As a practicing alcoholic, I was in the thrall of my instincts, like a character in a fairy tale that is under some kind of curse or magic spell. And I never really experienced freedom from this curse or spell until I got sober, until I entered the rooms of recovery and began to work with others towards my recovery. This is the gem or the heart of recovery, is we get clean and sober ourselves from whatever our addiction, and then we extend a helping hand to others. And that redeems all the crazy things that we did, you know. Before I came into recovery, I would have periods of restraint that would last a week or a month, or at one point, 5 years, but that next drink was always waiting for me. Stories from our Western tradition can be a kind of window into what Buddha calls the three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. And in Rumplestiltskin, the classic Grimm's fairy tale, a miller is chatting with the king, and he wants to impress him, so he mentions that his daughter is able to spin straw into gold. The very next day, the king installs this daughter in a dark room with a pile of straw and a spinning wheel, and he says, "Now spin, or tomorrow you will die." And the poor girl begins to cry piteously. She doesn't know how to spin straw into gold. And then suddenly this funny little man appears. "Good evening, miller's daughter," he says, tipping his hat. "How did you get in here?" says the miller's daughter. "The door is locked." "No matter," said the little man. "Listen to me. If you give me your necklace, I will spin this pile of straw into gold." Without a thought, she placed the trinket in his hand, and he sat down at the spinning wheel, and whir, 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 the pile of straw was transformed into a pile of gold, of glimmering gold. So this went on for a few nights, the little man appearing, the miller's daughter offering him her bracelet, her ring, in exchange for his magic. Finally, she rashly agrees to give the little man her firstborn child if he will spin this last pile of straw into gold. For who knows if she really will be queen, and if she is queen, who knows if she'll ever have a child. A year later, at dusk, the queen is playing with her beautiful daughter when the little man appears to exact his reward. When the queen begins to cry, a tiny little corner of his heart melts. And he tells her that if she can guess his name, he will go away and never bother her again. Of course, he knows she will never be able to guess his name. The next night when he returns, she gives him every name she can think of, and the following night as well. No, 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 that's not my name, crows the little man. So the queen sends a servant out to look far and wide to collect the strangest names he can find. When the servant returns, he tells the miller's daughter that the night before, as he made his way through a mountain pass, he saw a very peculiar sight. He saw a funny little man dancing around a fire and singing, "Today my flour I make, tomorrow my bread I bake. Tomorrow, 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 the queen's little baby I take. For lucky I am, as lucky as I came, for Rumplestiltskin is my name." When the little man appears that evening, the queen is waiting for him, sitting in the garden with her little daughter on her lap. "Well, miller's daughter, this is your last chance. Can you guess my name?" The queen smiled. "Is it Balthazar?" "No." "Is it Thibault?" "No." Could it be, let me see, is it Rumpelstiltskin? At that, the little man burst into a furious rage. Sputtering and howling, he stomps his feet so hard that a hole in the earth opens up beneath him and swallows him into darkness, never to be seen again. So let's look at this story from both a practice point of view and recovery point of view, whatever we're recovering from. In this story, the miller makes an offhand comment to the king, craving. He's craving the king's approval and trying to impress him. The daughter must then take up the burden of her father's unlived life. He's trying to get something through her that he never found himself. Having been given a life-threatening challenge to do the impossible, to spin straw into gold, this is what the father leads her to have to do. We won't even get into the fact that then she'll have to marry somebody who threatens her with death. We never even learn her real name. First she's the miller's daughter, and then she's the queen. And it is her father's offhand comment that condemns her to a small, dark room. We might say that the miller projects his unexpressed creativity, his own craving for fame and fortune onto this unwitting daughter. Like many parents, he unconsciously tries to live his life through his child. Many of us who grew up in abusive or alcoholic homes, homes with mental illness or homophobia or racism, we swore we would never repeat the patterns we grew up with that were taught to us by the adults in our lives. But sometimes the very pain of growing up around addiction, violence, or mental illness led us towards self-medication. And it might have been our genetic destiny, we know now, to turn towards addiction. And it can be really mystifying to find that despite our best intentions, we're repeating the ancient twisted karma of our family history. That's a line from our full moon ceremony in Buddhism, where we come together and kind of make amends for our unskillful behavior, our ancient twisted karma. We can't even know what kind of influences have caused us to do the things that we do. So the little man does this miraculous thing. He spins straw into gold. And at first, our addiction seems to give us what we don't have: euphoria, self-confidence, expansiveness, courage. I felt all those things the very first time I took a drink. We bargain with this addiction or with our unskillful behavior, giving away little parts of ourselves in exchange for the big yes of addiction. But in the end, one by one, addiction takes away from us what it first seemed to provide us with. The miller's daughter offers the little man a necklace, a ring, But as time goes by, she forgets her enormous debt to him, the debt that must be paid. Finally, he returns to her and demands of her what she promised, the most precious thing she has, this beautiful child. And from a psychological point of view, or the point of view of addiction, you might say that we're finally asked to give over the most precious things we have: our hope, our life force, our future. In the story, these things are symbolized by the newborn baby. And sadly, many who struggle with addiction actually have to sacrifice their child because they're unable to take care of that child. Those of us who are in recovery may have seen addiction as freedom and sobriety as a limitation, but each of us finally came to a fork in the road and had to choose between the limitation of addiction and the freedom of recovery. And what does the miller's daughter have to do? She's presented with a rare opportunity, the opportunity to name this demon that wants to take everything from her. And it's by naming this greedy little demon that she's finally free of him. And he's so angry that he stomps a hole in the earth and disappears. When I was a little girl, this is a story I love to have told to me over and over again. And I got goosebumps when I think, could you really get so angry that you would stomp a hole in the ground and disappear? You know, that's the main thing that got my attention. And I think our addiction and our unskillful and self-defeating habits, whatever they are, begin to lose their power over us when we finally turn towards them and give them a name. When we concede to our inmost self that what we thought was gold was really straw. And we understand now that this elixir, so magical in life, affirming at first, wants to take away from us the most precious thing we have, our life. St. Thomas quotes Jesus as saying, "If you bring forth that which is within you, that which you bring forth will save you. And if you don't bring forth that which is within you, what you don't bring forth will destroy you." So anything we do in our life that obstructs this ability to bring forth our potential, to bring forth our loving kindness, to bring forth our courage and our integrity, you know, things that may have been blocked by our negative habits or negative minds, you know, that can just be corrosive self-pity or corrosive resentment towards other people. So if we're under the spell of addiction, we're unable to fully call forth this precious potential that resides within us, and we're trapped. Many addicts, and I myself, talk about the narrow little place we find ourselves when we hit bottom, when we come to the end of our addiction. And this is like the dark little room that the miller's daughter finds herself in. We'll have our own kind of demon, our own delusions, our own cravings. And our practice begins wholeheartedly when we turn towards those things and face this little man, this demon, this monster, this dragon, Mara, you might call it in Buddhist terms, and give it a name, its true name. For those of us in recovery, this demon happens to be named addiction, and we find a world of freedom on the other side of this thick wall. But first, we must name the demon. We must name it and turn towards it. Until I named this demon that controlled me, I had no true freedom. I was locked, powerless in a little room, the little dark room that addiction took me to. And just by being willing, in the very first meeting I went to, I raised my hand and said, "I'm Laura and I'm an alcoholic." I wasn't sure about that. You know, I knew many people that drank more than I did, and they didn't have to come to recovery. They did later, many of them. But when I did that, when I was willing to identify myself as an alcoholic, and miraculously suddenly becoming willing to ask for help, that was huge. being able to later offer help, I began to walk the path of freedom. Gandhi said, and I want to say this because some of us in recovery struggle with the word God because we identify as Buddhist and we don't see that there's a deity running our lives. But Gandhi said, God is truth. You know, for many of us Buddhists, we say God is the Dharma. God is just a 3-letter word. You know, in Buddhism, we say a finger at the moon, pointing at the moon is not the moon. The word God is not God. It points to a mystery that's far beyond my ability to fully comprehend. Well, Gandhi said, God is truth, and confronting our illusion and admitting the truth is essential. Recognizing our self-defeating and self-destructive habits of mind and body, giving things the correct name is essential. And I came to find out through this investigation that what I thought was righteous indignation was really self-centered fear. And that what I thought was freedom was selfishness. That when I harmed others, I also harmed myself. And I learned the practice in recovery to write these things down, to write down the ways in which I'd harm myself and other people, and to become willing to make amends for those things when I could. And this helped me step out of the chaos of addiction with something precious to offer the world, a pinpoint of peace, of awakening that came to me as I did this inner work. Addiction is contagious in the sense that it seems to run in families. It's on both sides of my family, going all the way back to Ireland. And if we're in the thrall of addiction, we tend to gravitate towards the comfort of being with other addicts. Now, there's a saying in our literature that says we had to find that we could not drink like other people. I did drink like other people, but they were alcoholics. So I had to come to terms with this. But recovery is also contagious, and it's passed. We say Buddhism is passed from warm hand to warm hand. Recovery's passed from warm hand to warm hand. We encourage one another. We influence others in a positive way, often without even being aware of it. And we walk this path of recovery, and we walk this path of practice together. We shine a light on one small corner of the world to reach out and help another suffering person. And we taste the sweetness of our freedom and the universe that is open to us despite certain limitations. For those of us who've been lucky enough to find the path of Buddhist practice, we find the gift of Sangha, of fellowship, which is right in the name of your group. The gift of being with other people who want what we want and who will walk the illuminated path of practice along with us. This is where we find companionship, humor, encouragement, and strength. Hokusai, a wonderful Buddhist teacher, said, hundreds of years ago, said, having had the good fortune not only to have been born into this world as a human being, but also to have encountered the teaching of the great Shakyamuni Buddha, how can we help but be overjoyed? So these practices we take up in Buddhism of being honest with ourselves, being honest with others, paying attention to how we are in the world, trying not to harm others or ourselves. This is spinning straw into gold. So thank you so much for your kind attention. And we can have discussion now, and I'd love to hear whatever came to your mind as I blathered on. I, for myself, these twin paths of practice and recovery are inextricable from one another. And thank you for indulging me, because I know you're not all in recovery, but I hope you can see this is kind of a metaphor or a way of addressing, some of us are addicted to screen time or obsessive busyness or toxic relationships or toxic behaviors. So I hope you found something to identify with, because we're all, my partner David saw his son making his grandson making a Valentine. And David said to Skylar, "Who's that Valentine for?" And Skylar said, "Wyatt." And David said, "Who's Wyatt?" And Skylar said, "A human." I was so touched by that. I thought if we could all just see each other as a human. And how painful is it that religious divisions cause violence and suffering? It's just mystifying how we treat one another in this world, Now we forget that we're all just humans doing the best we can. So I'd love to hear from you. The floor is open. Yes.
I'd like to go back to the very beginning of our time together. When you went through metta, and there are different versions of it, it just struck me. It's like, may you be healthy, may you not suffer, may you find joy, and it's all like the teaching of Buddhism is that we can't do that really, right? Unless we, when and if we become Buddha, a Buddha, but Bodhisattva, we can't get rid of suffering. We can't be healthy. We're all going to get sick and die. So it just struck me as sort of a dichotomy or strange.
Well, you're striking on such a beautiful paradox in Buddhism. When we chant at Zen Center, and beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Dharma gates are endless, I vow to enter them. We can't fully do it. And when I came to Zen Center and I heard about sickness, old age, and death, which were the forms of suffering that the Buddha encountered, he escaped his protective compound and went into the village and saw people who were sick and old and dying. Well, when I heard about sickness, old age, and death, I certainly didn't think they were talking about me. Well, now I'm 74 years old. And I'm coming to terms with the fact that no, we cannot end suffering as long as we're in a human body. So it's a kind of paradox that we wish for an end of suffering, even though there's always been suffering and there always will be suffering. But I do think we can come to terms with the ways in which we can be of help. And when I found myself sitting in a classroom at San Francisco State at the age of 35 after gotten pitifully drunk the night before, I'd gone back to school to get my teaching credential, and it dawned on me that I could not be worthy of teaching kids unless I stopped drinking. Something deep inside me called out, "Please, please help me." I'd never done that before. I didn't know what I was asking for help. But if we can do that, if we can ask the universe for help, I found in recovery that our collective intention to stay sober was a power greater than myself. And I got better. So change is possible. And if we right now we're engaging in our collective intention to wake up as people who are in alignment with Buddhist teaching. So it's just a very crazy paradox that we aspire to end all suffering, and yet we know we can't. But we can all do something. Suzuki Roshi said, shine one corner of the world. Pick something, pick some place where you can have an impact. It doesn't feel like much, but like that butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon, we don't know how our kindness will spread out and help other beings. And by the same token, we don't know how our anger and impatience and irritability will spread out and affect others. Speaking of metaphors, traffic is a great metaphor for ego at work, Thank you so much for asking that. That's it's a koan we have to practice with. Yes.
I loved an analogy that you used, and I never heard it before, which was a finger pointing at the moon isn't the moon, and the name of God is just a finger pointing at the moon. I've never heard that before, and I'm curious context for that. Is that Buddhist teaching? Is that something?
It's a Zen teaching. I can't tell you exactly where it came from. But when I first started practicing and I would hear these quirky Zen stories, and I heard that phrase, I didn't really know what that meant. But I stored these things away, and then as my life unfolded, it would dawn on me, oh, that's like a finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon. And a lot of these, when I would hear these Zen stories, I think they were holding the sutra upside down when they translated it. That doesn't make any sense. So, hold that phrase as you go forth from this place, and I think you'll see that it will reverberate a little bit in your life. That a finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. And you know what? It's very widely applicable. So my idea about you is just my idea about you. It's not you. And even my ideas about myself are not me. It's just a finger pointing at the moon. And I love the playfulness of that phrase as well, And in recovery, I've sponsored other people, and I've been sponsored by other people, and I love the encouragement we have in Buddhism to just play with Buddhist teachings and see what works for you. Even he encouraged us to do that. And we can do that in recovery too, to play with the things that were offered in recovery and see what works for us. A finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
Laura, we have Bob online who has raised his hand.
Yes, I want to thank you for the story. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I wanted to thank you for the story you told, and also for describing how you asked for help with going through recovery, getting recovery. To me, that's the moral of the story you told. The miller's daughter doesn't solve her problem. She gets the help of the fellow who goes out and learns Rumplestiltskin's name. And I think to learn when we've got a problem, no matter how insurmountable it may seem, it's good to ask for help.
Thank you for so much for that. And you know what? I've told this story so many times to kids and to my daughter, and it never occurred to me before, who else helps her? The little man. Rumpelstiltskin helps her. He helps her, and he's a very contentious little being who wants everything from her. But I think maybe another message of the story that never occurred to me is that our unskillful behavior and the negative sides of ourselves are one end of a stick, So, for example, my alcoholism was a terrible curse or spell I was under, but enabled me to find this beautiful life of recovery. And so Rumpelstiltskin is a weird little guy, and yet he enables her to have a beautiful daughter. Let's not talk about the king and his problems, but so sometimes the very things that we reject in ourselves are the things that can help shine a light on our lives. So thanks, Bob, for that comment. Yes, we all need help. And for some of us, that's the hardest thing to ask for.
Laura, I have a question about, did you come to Buddhism after recovery, or because Buddhists can't be addicts?
Well, that is a really great question. I hit what we call an alcoholic bottom when I lived in Juneau, Alaska, when I had been having a lot of fun around using, because it gave me a lot of energy and creativity, I thought, and the ability to talk to people. But it started to turn on me when I started having blackouts. And I came to out of a blackout. Some of you heard this, crawling through the snow. Well, that got my attention. And I felt I was actually suicidal at the time, because I felt in such a dark place. But I had this little glimmer of hope. Maybe there's another way to live. So I came back to San Francisco, and that's when I came to Zen Center, and I stopped drinking just like that. I started practicing Zen, and I I loved the clarity of practice. I loved sitting Zazen. I was kind of addicted to it, to tell you the truth, because of the endorphins you get when you sit for long periods of time. But I made this mistake of thinking I can put on a black robe and be somebody else. And another thought I had in that classroom at San Francisco State was, I've been practicing, because what happened was, I stopped drinking. But then when I came back from Tassajara and I was living in a monastery where alcohol was pretty hard to get, alcohol started creeping back into my life. But at that point, for the next 5 years, it was intermittent drinking and secret drinking, because it wasn't okay for me to drink the way I like to drink. I just had to do it because I'm an alcoholic. And so I needed to come into the rooms of recovery. And by the way, when I walked into my first meeting, there was somebody from Zen Center there, and we looked at each other and burst out laughing. Now, you said Buddhists can't be addicts. Another thought that came to me in that room at San Francisco State was, I could think of many Buddhist teachers who'd harmed or destroyed their communities because they could not confront their addiction. You probably know some of their names. They could sit still for 7 days like I could, and they could deliver beautiful Dharma talks, and yet they could not stop drinking, using drugs, or having sex with their students. And that's been a terrible shadow side of Buddhism in our country. So maybe some people have been able to get sober just using Buddhism. For me, I didn't want to try to, I found it was much better for me to take what was offered in recovery and mix it in with my Buddhist practice. And together, that gave me a tremendous safety net against this disease, which is a disease that wants to kill me and almost did. And I've lost friends along the way. I've even had friends, I've lost friends to suicide who could not stop drinking because they couldn't get out of that dark, dark hole. So thank you for that. Yeah. How are we doing on time?
I was going to say something. I had my hand raised, but this is John.
I recognize that voice. Hi, John.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I just thank you, Laura, for very heartfelt talk. It really moved me. And I was just thinking about the power of not knowing the name and how that's a process. It's not just knowing in the fairy tale, of course, it happens once and Rumplestiltskin disappears. But my experience in my life is that there's an ongoing process of forgetting and remembering the name. And that's kind of why I have to stay active in my recovery and also come to the Sangha and hear teachers remind me of my true self and my true intention. And what you described about that point at which your mind is wandering and you turn around and come back to the breath, that's also a kind of remembrance of the name. And so I just feel like I have to, in order for me to stay on this middle path, I need others to remind me and of the direction and the purpose. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, John. That's so true. When I studied Spanish in Mexico, I made a wonderful friend, Chai, who was so much fun. And we would meet. He was my intercambio, so we'd meet and we'd speak English and then we'd speak Spanish. And he taught me this wonderful proverb that I've shared many times, maybe even here. I used to be able to say it in Spanish, but he said, each person has 4 parts: the part that everybody knows, the part that everybody but that person knows, the part that only that person knows, and the part that nobody knows. And so thank you to John for this reminder that we don't just get it, we don't just grasp it and hang on to it. And even enlightenment is not something we grasp. We have moments of awakening, and then we fall asleep again, and then we wake up again. And so this process of knowing who we really are, you know, in recovery, I had to find out that I didn't need to become a better person. I needed to just to be who I actually was, the being that drugs and alcohol prevented me from knowing, you know. So what intrigues me about those 4 parts of the person, of course, is the part that everybody but that person knows. And of course, when I heard that, I thought, oh yeah, everybody sees all my faults, the faults I can't even see myself. But guess what? Other people also see wonderful things about us that we aren't aware of. You know, and sometimes somebody will say to me, I'll never forget when you said, and I braced myself because I think, oh God, oh no, what did I say? What did I say? And they say, you said this thing that opened a door for me. And I didn't even remember saying it, you know. So this is the beauty of Sangha, that in being with other people, it can help, you know, what I said about Thomas, St. Thomas, being with others can call forth that which is within us that we haven't been able to call forth. I mean, that's certainly happened to me working with children. You know, I got sober at San Francisco State because there were meetings on campus. There were also pitchers of beer available in the student center, which had not been there when I was 18. And I am so very happy that I was able to teach kids without ever having alcohol in my breath. And many teachers have told me they had a bottle of Dewar's in their, you know, in their desk at school. So that I'm so grateful that I was able to be with children and learn from children, because those of you who are teachers probably feel the same way, that your children you teach are your teachers, you know. I'll never forget in class one time I used that old cliche, great minds think alike. And Paul raised his hand and said, no, they don't. That's what makes them great. And that young boy grew up to invent something that's he's in the Fortune 500 now because of this invention of his, which is a way, I don't quite know how it works, but a way of trapping CO2 with big trucks. So great minds. Yes.
Hi, I'm Terry. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I came here today. To spend time with everyone here and for your talk. And I was really, I loved how you talked about during your 7 days meditation by being musical. And especially just after, I don't know how long I was sitting, when it's 15 to 20 minutes, and I was completely failed at meditating. I felt like, you know, and my mind was wandering. And it reminded me when you said that of something my sponsor often says, is that we're not responsible for our first thought. But we are responsible for our second thought, or the action that we take.
Yeah.
And I thought that is an interesting reflection also, just of sitting and meditating.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something I'd love to be able to do better, I suppose.
Well, I think it's kind of an illusion to think you fail at meditation, because just sitting down as you did, you know, and being with other people who have the same intention, and you probably did come back to your breath many times. That is meditation, you know. And when I was meditating today, I remembered a line from one of the songs I sang in The Wizard of Oz as Dorothy. I'll share it with you now. Because it's a story of a girl growing up in Salina, Kansas, who comes out to California to practice Buddhism, you know. Somewhere in California, near LA, that's where I'll get enlightened. That's where I'll make good pay. I still have that script somewhere. I did produce that play. You know, there's a tradition in Zen that in the middle of a practice period, you celebrate. You have a celebration because it's a very rigorous time during the practice period. And one of the traditions is to make fun of the Roshi. So our Roshi at the time, Richard Baker, was on the phone all the time. And so part of my musical comedy was that Dorothy goes to the land of Zaz and she knocks on the door and the Roshi's assistant comes to the door and he just keeps saying, he's on the phone. He's on the phone. And you know, Richard Baker wasn't there when I did this play, but I wonder if he probably did hear about that. I had a student who he was the youngest student in our school to come out as gay when he was in fourth grade. When he was in third grade, he was very dramatic, very volatile, you know. And I took him aside, and I probably told this story here before, but I took him aside and I said, you know, you're so emotional and so dramatic. You might really love theater. I said, I grew up doing community theater and I was in a lot of plays in high school. I majored in drama when I went to college, and I always wanted to be an actor when I grew up. And he looked at me and said, so Laura, what made you abandon your dreams? And I said, there's plenty of drama in third grade. Thank you very much. Yes.
This is slightly off topic, but were you aware of what kids were gay as they came through your classroom? Did you have an intuition or it was?
I did sometimes. I did sometimes. And you know, there's when I went back to my school this week to see a performance, there were a couple of transgender kids that I had questions about, maybe some gender identity issues with them when they were in third grade. I had a little girl named Robin in my class who was quite a tomboy, you know, and she was very athletic, and she played on a boys' soccer team. She was a great soccer player, and they were going to go into the playoffs, and her coach said to her, you know, Robin, we're not allowed to have any girls on the team for the playoffs. And she said, what? He says, what do you say? Do you want to play anyway? Because he thought they wouldn't notice that she was a girl. She had very short hair and she was really tough, you know. So she played in that game and they won. And then she said to the other team, you got beat by a girl. And I ran into Robin and her wife. You know, when I was my daughter and I went to get a Christmas tree, and there was Robin and her beautiful wife. So I really felt when I was teaching kids that I wanted to touch that tender heart of who they were. And many times they felt different than other kids. I felt different than other kids growing up. And so I wanted to meet those children heart to heart. And I wouldn't be surprised if that boy who asked me why I abandoned my dreams isn't in musical theater right now. I think maybe that's all the time. So I just want to say I really love coming here. I always feel so warmly welcomed by you, and you call forth something within me. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.